Let's get salty!
Hey yo, Zeddy here again today with a brand new video. We have the expansion announcement delayed for a couple days, and I thought it'd be a lot of fun to do a tier list. We haven't done a tier list in a while, and actually haven't done this tier list in quite some time, where we rank every Hearthstone expansion ever, from S through F, S being a god tier, amazing, ridiculously good expansion, and F just being why did they bother? It just sucked, or it was bad for the game, or unimpactful, or whatever. We'll justify it as we go along, as well as I'll link this tier list below if you want to fill it out yourself. It's a lot of fun. You can let me know in the comments below what you agree with and disagree with, and if you feel like I've earned your subscription, appreciate if you'd hit that sub button. We're on the road to 50k this year, and your help would go a long way. So anyways, let's rate every single Hearthstone expansion from S through F. So starting off, we'll go with the classic slash basic set that was the fundamentals for everything in Hearthstone, and introduced pretty iconic cards like Ragnarok, Sylvanas, and a Millhouse Mana Storm. You gotta give it an S. It's what started the game. So many cards, iconic cards are from there, and some, very few, but some still see play to this day. And I just have to give it, you gotta give props to the origins of the game. I think it was a pretty good starting set. Next, we have the first adventure, Curse of Naxxramas. Pretty iconic stuff in there with like Lotheb, Haunted Creeper, you got Death Lord. But overall, this was a pretty good adventure. The adventure content itself was very challenging, probably the most challenging they ever put out. A lot of fun back in the day. And I gotta give it I'll give it an A. I think there's a lot of solid cards. You can get some Undertaker PTSD, of course, that dominated back in the day. But the fact that there's still Curse of Naxxramas cards today that see play in Wild is pretty amazing, and a testament to how ridiculous Curse of Naxxramas really was. I mean, that's quite a credible feat for cards that still see play. Next, we have the first official Hearthstone expansion to be added to the game, Goblins versus Gnomes, with pretty iconic cards like Dr. Boom, Piloted Shredder, you got Anti-Keelbot, you had a bunch of mechs, you even had Trogzor, who was no Dr. Boom, as Chacky once said, who, by the way, is now a card designer, and I guess he'll have a better assessment of cards now these days. But overall, GVG was when I started playing the game. It holds quite a lot to me, but I don't think it's aged particularly well. Most of the cards just don't see play. And a lot of the complaints were around randomness, especially like around Implosion and Crackle and the Boom bots were all kind of frustrating design. I'll give Goblins versus Gnome a B, because it is kind of, near and dear to my heart. That's when I started playing the game. But overall, I could definitely warrant a C on that one. It's definitely not one of the top ones. Up next, we have the adventure, and this is the only content drop in Hearthstone history to never be nerfed, and that's Blackrock Mountain. Staples with Emperor Thorson, Flamewaker, Quickshot, some really good stuff. Blackrock for me is an S. I love Blackrock Mountain. You have the whole dragons going on. You even have like Nefarian and Chromagus, really cool cards. It's flavorful as hell. Grim Patron led to a crazy meta around Grim Patron, where I just think it was a phenomenal expansion. Next, we have the Grand Tournament, which saw Inspire and Joust introduced to the game, but probably more importantly, Mysterious Challenger, which was just ridiculous and busted at the time. And I'm not a big fan of the Grand Tournament. The mechanics didn't really pan out very well. The majority of the cards were not super impactful, and if they were, they felt pretty toxic. I'm gonna give the Grand Tournament a C. Not very high up on my list, but there's some cool cards in there nonetheless. Next, we have the adventure of League of Explorers, which introduced Reno Jackson, so the whole Highlander mechanic, which might be coming back. Devs seem to be hinting about it on Twitter, that we might get Reno in the core set, so watch out for that. But you have Sir Finley, Bran, and you also have Tunnel Trog, which keeps this down to an A for me. I still to this day have PTSD from Tunnel Trogs hitting me in the face, but this was a really cool adventure, again, with tons of impactful cards that still see play to this day. But it's okay, I'll give it an S. It deserves an S, just for Reno, just for Finley. Even Elise was a really cool card back in the day, but Tunnel Trog is the one like little blemish on it. Next, we have the Whispers of the Old Gods, which introduced all the old gods. You had Cthulhu, Yogg, Yasharaj, N'Zoth. Unbelievable expansion. Arguably peak Hearthstone, never probably more popular than it's ever been during the Old Gods phase. I gotta give it an S. Really amazing. And as someone who liked playing Warrior, there was like 8 different Warrior decks you could play at the time. really great, and combine it with an expansion like Blackrock Mountain led to just really cool decks. Next we have the Adventure of One Night in Katrazhan, which is all about random crap. You had like the portals, like Maelstrom Portal, Firelands Portal, you had Barns, just a kind of a gross expansion. Spirit Claws was introduced, which was really toxic at the time, and it goes about rolling spell damage totems most often. Really didn't like Katrazhan. I'm gonna give this a very low C, not quite an F, but honestly, Katrazhan definitely one of the weaker content drops. Then we have Mean Streets of Gadgetzan, which had the whole tri-class thing introduced. You had like the Grimy Goons, you had the Jades, you had the Kazaka stuff going on. This expansion was the only expansion that ever made me quit the game because the cards like Small Time Buccaneer and Pouches basically being too good, too aggressive, and then Jade Idol and stuff was pretty toxic. For me, Mean Streets, not quite enough, but again, a low C. There was just so many unfun parts about Mean Streets for me, in particular, like the Jades and the hardcore aggression. There was some cool stuff in there at the end of the day with like Raza was pretty cool, you know, at the time, and some other stuff. But overall, it's just, for me, Mean Streets is just a bad memory of that meta. It literally made me quit. No other expansion has done that. Not even United Stormwind, although I might rate that a little bit lower. We'll see. We have Journey to Angoro, probably my favorite expansion ever. It's an S. It introduced quests for the first time and showed that quests don't have to be completely terrible and frustrating, although yeah, Coverage Below might argue with that, but overall the majority of the quests felt really cool or fair. It also just had really cool elemental stuff, especially Shaman with like Kalamos. That was insane. The flavor was off the charts. You had Ben Brode's Angoro's song. You also had Elise, which would shuffle an Angoro pack. Really amazing expansion, probably peak Hearthstone. You had Angoro and Old Gods in Standard at the same time. Just incredible stuff. Next we have the Knights of the Frozen Throne, which introduced Death Knight, so you had like Frostlich Jaina or Blood Reaver Gul'dan. Insanely flavorful expansion and trailer, but I think it's held a little too high in people's minds because outside of the Death Knights, there wasn't a lot of amazing stuff with the expansion. There was also kind of some problematic cards as well. You had like Prince Keleseth and Bone Mare, which were pretty oppressive at the time, but overall, it's an amazing expansion with the Death Knights. I mean, Frostlich Jaina is one of my favorite cards of all time. I'll give it an A, but I don't hold it in the same regard as these top tier expansions. Next, we have Kobolds and Catacombs, which I've been back and forth on. I used to really not like it, and now I kind of do. Had the legendary weapons. It also had Warlock just being insane. They had like Kobold Librarian. They had Ridden the Discipling. They had Possessed Lackey, Dark Pact. Just such incredible cards. Skull the Minari, as well as Void Lord. Incredible expansion for Warlock. The Carnivorous Cube came out during this era, which is incredible. You also had egregious cards like Corridor Creeper, which were just disgusting. I'm going to bump Kobolds all the way up to an A. I really enjoyed Raza Anduin back then. I really did. And even though cards like Psychic Scream came out, I still think Kobolds especially with the cube decks, the cube stuff was just so amazing that I got to put it in an A, as a very solid expansion. Next, we have the Witchwood, which introduced like the hero power cards like Gen and Baku, which got Hall of Fame year early, introduced the rush mechanic. To me, it's a middling expansion, not amazing. They started trying to scale down the power level, one of the only times in Hearthstone history they've done that. That was the pattern of that year, and as a result, it just kind of felt meh. And I really didn't like Gen and Baku. They made the games feel very linear, very similar, and we might talk about that in a little bit as well. And then they followed off with the Boomsday project, which had a bunch of mechs. It introduced the hero card in Dr. Boom Mad Genius, and I actually really love Boomsday. I think it's one of the more recent top tier expansions, but my goodness, that's actually been a little bit ago. Time flies. For me, it's an A, a solid A. I really like the whole mech feeling. You have also the legendary spells in there. Just a solid expansion. Then, of course, you have Rostigan's Rumble, which is regarded as like one of the worst expansions. It didn't have a ton of impact. The flavor of the expansion was good. The mechanics were interesting, but the power level wasn't there to compete with the old stuff, and then they went power creeping immediately after. We've had a video talking about it. I think Rosticons is unjustly badly remembered, and I'll give it a middle B. If they just could have stopped power creeping for a little bit, Rumble could have actually had a time to shine, but it never did, because the next expansion was Rise of Shadows, which just went absolutely crazy with the power level. You had the lackey cards. It had the whole League of Evil storyline going on, and yeah, Rise of Shadows, incredibly powerful expansion, but RNG went right up like crazy with it. You had Bomb Warrior introduced, which is not a mechanic I particularly like, getting bomb shuffled in my deck and dying. Particularly for me, Rise of Shadows is actually C. I thought it was the wrong direction to go for the game, and it's been on that trajectory ever since. Of we escalate power level, we reuse old ideas a lot, and that's been basically almost every expansion since then. Saviors of Old Doom, speaking of bringing back prior mechanics, brought back quests, but did it in a way that a lot of people liked it. Not one quest was nerfed, and a lot were very playable, like the Druid one. Warlocks eventually became playable. Shamans was very prolific with the battle cry, and I really like Saviors of Old Doom. I thought it was great until they had the old Doom in the Tomb event where they brought Evolve back into standard. It kind of ruined it, but overall, I'm going to give Saviors of Old Doom an A. I thought it was a phenomenal expansion. Next, we have the Descent of Dragons. I think the last time I did this tier list, I gave it an F. I hated it because it brought in Dragon Lackeys, it brought in Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, which was busted, Galakron Shaman, which was busted, a lot of things that were just gross and nasty, and I got mad and salty, and I mellowed out a bit, and I don't love Descent of Dragons. I know a lot of people do. I don't love it, but I don't hate it like I used to. Draconic Lackey is probably the biggest offender for me. I actually liked Galakron Shaman. I liked the flavor of it. It was just too good. But overall, I'm actually going to give it a B. There's some cards that were a bit of offenders, but the dragon theme was solid, and it's not quite an F to me anymore. Ashes of Outland introduced Demon Hunter, which just broke the game, and I hated Demon Hunter for quite some time until now. It's actually one of my favorite classes now that it's more reasonably balanced and feels pretty cool to play. Even got rank 1 legend playing it. I also introduced prime minions, which I loved. I thought they were really cool, well designed. And overall, Ashes of Outland, again for me, probably more of a B, but an expansion I definitely do enjoy more in hindsight than I did probably at the time, particularly with how Ashes of Outland just Demon Hunter was disgusting, but now I can kind of, we have 5 other expansions since then. It's kind of, it's been balanced for a lot longer now than it hasn't been, and it feels a lot better in retrospect. We have Skullman's Academy, probably the most, I would say the most broken expansion ever. The most powerful expansion ever. Saw just, I don't know how many cards in there. If we talked about that, we have cards, like the dual class cards introduced. You had Raised Dead, Janice Barov, you had Wand Thief, you had Secret Passage, you had Lorekeeper Polkelt, you had all these new cool mechanics like Lorekeeper Polkelt or a Sphere of Sapience. I love Skullman's Academy. I know it's broken, but I thought the flavor of this expansion was just tremendous. There were so many cool things to do, even if they were utterly broken. At least they were cool to do. They were fun to play. They didn't feel horrible to face unless you were getting trounced by it. But overall, I just thought the flavor was so solid that I'm going to give it an S. I think Skullman's deserves it. You can do broken as long as it's fun and flavorful and not linear broken quest lines, which you can talk about. I like half of this tier list is Donkey on United Storm, whatever. We have Madness at the Dark Moon Fair. I think a good expansion brought the old gods back. You had the corrupt mechanic introduced, and I thought all the old gods felt pretty good. They even buffed N'Zoth to 9 mana, and I like Dark Moon Fair. It's kind of in that A range for me. A solid expansion, something I definitely enjoy. We have Forge of the Barons, which has been mocked for being rather uneventful. It made board battles kind of matter though. Like it's the last expansion where board-centric strategies worked. Like Rush Warrior was a very popular thing with cards like Conditioning. I like Forge of the Barons. I think it's a solid expansion. I think it deserves a B. It wasn't a mind-blowing expansion, didn't do anything crazy, but that's fine. Not everything has to be busted. And then we get to United in Stormwind, which we all know it's going to be an F. I think it's been detrimental to the game. Quest lines are just awful. If they're playable, they're frustrating and you hate them. And if they're not playable, then what's the point? Because you're just wasted a legendary slot. So it's one of those things where it's like, it's either really good and it's frustrating, or it's bad and it's pointless. And that's just not a good recipe for any expansion. There's other stuff in United Stormwind that's not so bad, but it's dominated by the questline stuff right now. Even to this day, you have Quest Hunter dominating in Standard and Wild. You have Quest Shaman. You have a Pirate Warrior dominating in Wild. It's just, I find the linear, frustrating mechanics of it and how it doesn't encourage board battles and all of that to be frustrating. And for me, it's still an F to this day. I'm going to put Mean Streets as an F, by the way. I'm going to bump it down. I just thought about Jade Idol a bit more in Small Time Buccaneer. I'm triggered. I'm putting it down to an F. It deserves to hang out with United Stormwind. And lastly, we have the most recent expansion, Fractured Alterac Valley, that outside of cards like Snowfall Guardian, which I think are really unhealthy for the game, I think Fractured Alterac Valley was more of a step in the right direction. a lot of cool, flavorful cards. It seemed to try to promote board battling a bit more, but as a result, a lot of the cards haven't been super impactful. If hopefully we can get back to that, but I'll give it a B. I think it's been a good expansion, and as you can see, I think there's been more hits than misses. A lot of middle of the road, but that's fine. I don't think a B is particularly bad, and then these are just the ones that just didn't quite hit for me on a personal level. So let me know in the comments below what you agree with, disagree with, and if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Have a great day, and stay salty, my friends.